It doesn't begin with a jolt, but with a scent. A deep, earthy smell of damp moss and fallen leaves that you've only ever read about in books. The air is cool on your skin, and the only sound is a profound quiet you didn't know existed. Not the digital silence between notifications, nor the low hum of appliances in another room, but a real, pressing stillness that belongs to a world without a constant, electric heartbeat. It's a heavy, ancient quiet, punctuated only by the distant rustle of leaves and the hollow, lonely call of a nightbird. Your hands feel the chill in the air, a dampness that clings to everything. You're resting on soft earth. You sit up slowly, your heart beating not with a frantic hammering, but with a strange, steady rhythm of deep confusion and a quiet sense of wonder. The darkness here is absolute, not the city at night kind of dark, peppered with ambient light, but a thick, velvety blackness, a total absence of manufactured light. As your eyes strain and eventually adjust, shapes begin to emerge from the void. The silhouettes of ancient trees, heavy with moss, and perhaps a distant, flickering point of firelight dancing between their crooked branches. Instinctively, you reach for your phone. The screen glows weakly. No service, no signal, just 3% battery life. The lock screen, with its familiar picture, suddenly feels like the very last thread connecting you to your own time, your own world. You take a slow, deep breath, and then you notice the smells. Not unpleasant, just deeply unfamiliar. The air carries the scent of wood smoke, wet leaves, distant livestock, and a musky, organic perfume you can't quite place. It's the raw, unsterilized scent of a world that lives and breathes in a way yours has long forgotten. You are here, not in a familiar backyard, but in the sprawling English countryside. And judging by the complete absence of paved roads, wire fences, or proper chimneys, you are several hundred years too early for your own time. You found yourself in medieval England, likely sometime in the 14th century. The how and why are mysteries that feel too large to even consider right now. The immediate joke of a time machine has faded, replaced by a simple, pressing need. You need a plan. The first rule your mind offers up, a whisper from a calmer part of yourself: don't panic. The second rule follows closely: don't let anyone see you appear from nowhere. In this medieval world, strangers weren't always met with terror, but they were always met with an intense, unwavering curiosity. And if your clothes, your way of speaking, or your mannerisms mark you as too foreign, too inexplicably different, you likely won't be burned as a witch. That's a trope from a later, more paranoid time. But you will be gossiped about, questioned endlessly, and possibly seen as an easy target to be robbed. Or worse, you'll be forced into a story spun by others, a narrative you can't control. So, you move with a quietness you didn't know you possessed. The forest around you is thick, but it's not a truly wild place. These are not untouched woods. They've been managed, scavenged, and shaped by human hands. The forests of medieval England weren't pristine nature preserves. They were a vital resource, heavily used for firewood by common folk, for hunting by nobles, and for gathering mushrooms and berries by anyone who was allowed. Nearly all of this land was owned. Every fallen twig and branch had a price, belonging to the local lord. If you were caught breaking branches from a living tree or dragging away a log, and you couldn't prove you were a tenant with rights to do so, it would be considered theft. And in this era, the price for theft could be as high as a hand. You walk toward the faint glow, which seems to be a small town still nestled among the trees. The lights are few, just a smattering of torches or perhaps the warm light of hearth fires spilling through crude wooden shutters. There are no street lamps, no glass window panes reflecting the night. There are only wooden planks with small slits for air, or perhaps a piece of animal hide stretched thin to keep out the worst of the wind. Light leaks, flickers, and vanishes as people move about inside. As you draw closer, you find what must be the road. It isn't paved, not even with cobblestones, just a track of packed mud, deeply scored by the ruts of cart wheels and pocked with murky puddles. Medieval roads were not built for comfort. They were functional scars carved across the landscape, often flooded, treacherously slippery, and even worse after a frost. You try to keep your footing, But already your shoes, sleek, modern, and utterly out of place, are caked in a thick layer of grime. A thought solidifies in your mind. They have to go. You duck behind a large oak and take them off, hiding them in a hollow. Your socks go too. Clothing is a language here, and you are speaking nonsense. You're wearing synthetic fibers, woven by machines that haven't been dreamed of, held together by zippers and stitches of impossible neatness. To walk into town in jeans and a sweatshirt would be like arriving in a spaceship. Best case, they assume you're a performer or a traveler from a land so distant it might as well be the moon. Worst case, they think you're an escaped lunatic. So, you do what any prudent traveler to another time must. You bury your modern clothes deep in the soft earth. You tuck your silent phone into the very bottom of your bag. You even unwind the hoodie from your waist and tie it around a tree branch, a small, sad flag of surrender to your old life. You strip down to a simple thermal undershirt. In the dim light, its texture could almost pass for a linen tunic. You pull your hair back into a simple, rustic knot, rub a little dirt on your cheeks for good measure, and practice an expression of someone who looks weary, but hopeful. There is a town gate ahead. You approach it cautiously, just as the first hint of dawn paints the eastern sky in soft strokes of blue and pink across the frost-kissed ground. Towns in this period often had gates, not necessarily to keep people in, but to keep thieves and wandering animals out. Many also had curfews, marked by the ringing of a bell at sundown. After dark, entry was restricted unless you had a very good reason and could prove it. If you'd arrived in the dead of night, you might have been turned away or even fined for your troubles. But now, as the town begins to slowly stir, you slip in with a small group of early risers, traders, peasants, perhaps fellow pilgrims. No one gives you a second glance. The street is narrow and muddy. The houses lean at odd, charming angles, their timber frames exposed. The walls are wattle and daub, a lattice of wooden slats packed with a mixture of mud, straw, and animal dung. The roofs are all thatched. The air smells of firewood, damp earth, and animals. Chickens dart across your path, and you hop to avoid stepping on one. People here, you recall from a documentary, often slept differently. Many had a first sleep, waking in the middle of the night for an hour or two to tend the fire, say quiet prayers, or simply talk, before returning for a second sleep. The idea of a solid, uninterrupted 8-hour block of sleep was not yet common. You pass what must be a blacksmith's forge, its walls blackened with soot and the air tasting of iron and sweat. You pass a stable, a cook shop selling yesterday's bread, and a pot bubbling with something that smells of onions and a deep, simmering weariness. No one greets you. This is good. But you know someone will eventually ask the question, who are you? In the Middle Ages, everyone belonged somewhere, to a household, to a guild, to a parish, to a lord. The concept of a lone traveler just passing through was foreign. If you didn't belong to a network, you weren't protected. And if you weren't protected, you were vulnerable to crime, to arrest, or to simple, pervasive suspicion. So you rehearse the story you've decided upon. You are a pilgrim. It feels like the safest, most believable role to play. Pilgrims were a common sight on the roads, and they could be from anywhere, heading anywhere. A story about being on a journey to Canterbury or Santiago de Compostela would satisfy most casual inquiries. You invent a small village for yourself, for 100 miles away, hoping no one here has a cousin living there. You practice a polite, deferential bow when someone makes eye contact. You remind yourself not to offer a handshake. That gesture of greeting wasn't common yet. You decide to speak as little as possible. Your accent is a strange melody here, your grammar even stranger. It's best to mumble and smile faintly. Then, a kindness. A woman at a stall, seeing you stand there, offers you a piece of bread. It's dry, dense, made mostly of rye, likely bulked up with barley and bean flour. But it is warm. You chew it slowly, nodding your thanks, hoping this simple act of eating makes you look less like someone who fell out of the sky last night. Just like that, you've survived your first hour. But the day is only just beginning. You have been awake in this century for less than an hour, and already you are becoming someone else. That's how things work here. There are no passports, no photo IDs, no digital footprints. There are only stories. And in medieval England, your story is your shield. You need to make yours stronger. You chose the safest story you could think of, The Pilgrim. You try out your first version of it on a stable boy who asks where you're headed. You pause for a fraction of a second. Canterbury, you say, not because you feel particularly religious, but because it's the only medieval pilgrimage site you can name under pressure. It works. He nods with a solemn understanding and returns to mucking out straw. That is your new truth now. You are a pilgrim, on your way to visit the shrine of St. Thomas Becket, the archbishop who was famously murdered in Canterbury Cathedral back in 1170. His martyrdom transformed the city into one of Europe's most visited holy sites. Pilgrims journeyed from all over the continent, rich and poor, sick and healthy, the devout and the desperate, all hoping for miracles, for forgiveness, or simply for a few days of peace under God's watchful eye. It is an excellent cover. Pilgrims were everywhere in the Middle Ages, moving between towns, staying at inns and monasteries, traveling in groups for safety when they could, and alone when they had to. Some wore the scallop shell of Santiago as a badge of honor. Others carried simple wooden staffs or painted tokens from shrines they had already visited. Most were poor. Many were ill. A few were even fugitives from the law. All of them were tired. And now, you're one of them. The story isn't just for strangers. It's for yourself, too. You repeat it silently, smoothing its edges, adding believable details. You come from a distant village. You're traveling alone because your cousin, who was to be your companion, fell ill. You're visiting Canterbury because your brother had a prophetic dream. You are doing penance for a sin you will not name. You've even practiced just enough church Latin from memory to make your mumbled prayers sound vaguely authentic. Your story buys you shelter. At a small priory, a monk in a simple, gray-robed habit listens to your tale and, with a wave of his hand, welcomes you inside. He doesn't ask too many questions. He doesn't seem surprised by your odd accent or your patchy knowledge of scripture. Pilgrims, after all, were expected to be a bit odd. You say you've been walking for weeks. He believes you. In this world, everyone looks weathered by life. He shows you to a room, or rather, a corner of a drafty hall where 3 other pilgrims are already asleep, side by side on straw pallets. One of them snores with the rumbling cadence of an injured bear. Another mutters fitfully in his sleep. You pull the rough, borrowed wool cloak tighter around your shoulders and try not to think about bed bugs. Hospices and monasteries were some of the only places in medieval Europe where a traveler could find a place to sleep without paying in coin. The church was, by law and by spiritual duty, obligated to provide charity to pilgrims. That obligation was sometimes overlooked, of course, especially if the priory's resources were stretched thin, but most would still offer at least a piece of stale bread, a spoonful of pottage, and a patch of floor near a fire. You eat what you are given. A simple pottage of boiled barley, its texture unfamiliar, its taste earthy and honest. You chew each spoonful slowly, deliberately, not thinking of the spices and flavors you once knew, but focusing on the warmth spreading through you. The spoon is shared, wiped clean on a cloth that has seen many seasons. Your bowl is made of wood, worn smooth with time, perhaps older than the great cathedrals you've only read about. Around you, the other pilgrims begin to talk in low murmurs. One man rubs his leg, his face etched with the memory of a long road. Another coughs softly into his cloak. They share fragments of their own stories. A woman whose quiet prayers are for her son's health. A man seeking a kind of peace he couldn't find back home. A third who simply wanted to see the world beyond his own village. No one asks for the details of your own journey. They seem to understand. In this age, a pilgrimage was a complex tapestry woven from threads of faith, social need, and sometimes a quiet desire to escape. It was a way to step outside of your own life without truly vanishing. You try to sleep, but your thoughts are a gentle current. In the world you knew, identity was a fixed thing. A name, a photo, a set of digital records. Here, it is as malleable as soft clay. You could be anyone, so long as you walked with purpose and kept your story close to your heart. No one here has heard of the internet. No one is going to fact-check your claim that you once knew a farmer from a village they've never seen. They will simply nod, because in a world that runs on spoken words and shared trust, believing strangers is often a necessity. You rise the next morning not by choice, but with the rest of the monastery. There is no privacy, no separate room, and a bell tolls for matins, the morning prayer, well before the sun has risen. The great hall is cold, and you can see your breath fog in the half-light. You don't know the ancient words of the prayers, but you stand with the others, your quiet hum blending with their murmurs. No one seems to notice. Many are lost in their own silent conversations with the divine. Afterward, you are handed a heel of bread and given a nod that means it is time to continue your journey. Pilgrims do not linger. Outside, the town is slowly coming to life. Vendors are rolling open their wooden stalls, displaying root vegetables still dusted with soil, well-used tools, and meat of a pale, unappetizing gray. You walk past a butcher's stall and try not to stare at the pig carcass hanging from an iron hook. Flies are already beginning to dance around it. Without refrigeration, freshness was a daily struggle, and salt, the primary preservative, was a luxury. You remember something from a history program. Most towns had a market day, usually once a week, when people from the surrounding countryside would bring their goods to sell: eggs, cheese, fresh greens. Here, there are no fixed prices neatly displayed on signs. Everything is a negotiation, a dance of haggling and barter. And if you don't know the local currency, the silver pennies, the half pennies, the farthings, you are at a distinct disadvantage. You wish to buy something, a piece of fruit perhaps, but then you remember you have nothing of value to trade, not even a single coin. You still have your modern wristwatch tucked safely away, but its face, which marks hours and minutes with such precision, is meaningless here. People in this world measure their days by the tolling of church bells, the rhythm of prayers, and the slow, majestic arc of the sun. If it is light out, you work. If it is dark, you rest, you pray, or you seek shelter. You decide to rely on kindness instead. You spot a woman selling what look like simple oatcakes from a small table. You approach her slowly, your posture humble but not pitiful. You speak softly, explaining that you are on the road, your supplies are low, and you feel blessed to see such a kind face. It's a simple speech, but she offers you one of the cakes. Perhaps she believes your story. Perhaps she simply enjoys feeding weary travelers. Or perhaps she believes that aiding a pilgrim will earn her a small measure of grace. Such kindness was woven into the fabric of the culture. You murmur Deus te adiuvit in your best attempt at a Latin accent. God help you. She nods, pleased. You chew the oatcake slowly as you wander the streets. It is dense, unsweetened, and has a slightly bitter aftertaste from the grain, but it is food. It is sustenance. You silently count your blessings. 1 oatcake, 2 strong legs, and no fever. Yet, you pass a group of children playing in the dirt. One of them is rolling a carved wooden hoop with a stick, their face a mask of concentration. Another clutches a crude but well-loved doll made of rags. They stop their games to stare at you, not with fear, but with a wide-eyed, unfiltered curiosity. One of them points toward your wrist, where your watch is hidden. You cover it instinctively, and that's when a new realization settles upon you. You have a story, a cloak, and the status of a pilgrim, but you don't have the subtle markers of a life lived here. You don't have years of dirt work deep under your fingernails. You don't carry yourself with the slight, weary slump of someone who has known a lifetime of scarcity. You walk a little too straight. You still flinch at unfamiliar smells. You make eye contact a little too directly. The differences are subtle, but they are there. To them, you still don't quite fit. So you consciously lower your gaze. You let your shoulders slump just a little. You try to mimic the shuffling gait of the old man you saw last night. You learn to listen more before you speak. This world doesn't care about the knowledge you carry in your head. It cares whether you can feel and follow its rhythm, blend into its song, or disappear into its silence. That night, you find a different place to sleep. A barn, offered by a kind-faced farmer in exchange for an hour of chopping wood. You agree before he even finishes the sentence. The axe handle is rough in your soft hands, and they begin to blister after only a few minutes. The farmer doesn't seem to notice, or perhaps he doesn't care. Labor is labor. A little pain is simply part of life. As you lie in the hay later, curled into a ball against the evening chill, you rehearse your story again. You are a pilgrim from the north, on the long road to Canterbury, traveling for penance, alone, always alone. And as the stars blaze overhead, bright and indifferent in a sky free of city glow, you realize a simple truth. Weaving a new story for yourself is easy in the Middle Ages. Living it is the hard part. You wake to the sound of birdsong and a stiffness in your neck. The straw you slept on is shifted, and a stray twig has embedded itself somewhere beneath your shoulder blade. You roll over slowly, brushing away a few curious gnats, and blink your eyes open to a patch of gray sky filtered through the low, heavy branches of an oak tree. You have no roof this morning, only tree limbs and a soft, lingering fog. This is your camp now, a small hollow in the earth behind a mossy boulder, just hidden from the main forest path. It's the perfect place for someone trying to become invisible for a while. You were lucky to be offered more work. The farmer's wife, you've decided it must be his wife, told you they needed an extra pair of hands to gather firewood and herbs from the forest. You agreed instantly, without asking what it would entail. You needed the food. You still do. So today, you are a forager. And like everything else in this time, this job has its own set of ancient rules. The first rule: the forest does not belong to you. This is a difficult concept to grasp if you come from a world of public parks and protected wilderness, where anyone with hiking boots can wander freely. But here, in the 1300s, the forest is not wilderness, it is property. Every stretch of woodland is owned by a noble, claimed by the king, or attached to a monastery's estate. You do not own the acorns on the ground. You do not own the rabbits that dash through the undergrowth. You do not even own the fallen twigs. Collecting firewood might seem harmless, but if you're caught with the wrong type of wood in the wrong part of the forest, you could be fined, beaten, or even branded. These are the forest laws, introduced after the Norman conquest and expanded over the centuries. They were designed to protect the hunting grounds for the wealthy elite. Royal forests were especially off-limits. You could be hanged for killing a deer, or flogged simply for chopping down the wrong tree. So, the second rule is simple: don't get caught. You keep to the edges of the woods, avoiding the well-trodden paths. You carry a dull knife and a simple sack that once held barley. You pick up only what has already fallen: twigs, small branches, and dry bramble. No cutting, no chopping, just gathering. The forest is peaceful in the early hours, the silence broken only by the chattering of squirrels and the distant, cooing call of a wood pigeon. You see no one else. This is good. The best foragers are the ones no one ever notices. But silence does not equal safety. The forest still holds its dangers. Wolves have mostly been hunted out of southern England by this century, and bears have been gone for even longer. But there are still wild boars, nests of hornets, and, most dangerous of all, other men. You hear a sudden crunch of leaves behind you. You freeze, every muscle tense. It's just a deer, you tell yourself. Still, your heart quickens its pace. Bandits are a real threat here. The woods are a natural hideout for the desperate, escaped serfs, outlaws, and deserters from local militias. They live rough, ambushing travelers and disappearing back into the trees. The king's law is a distant echo in these parts. If someone robs you out here, there will be no justice. You had truly thought you were ready. You had spent weeks with historical texts, watched hour-long linguistic breakdowns on YouTube, and even practiced speaking aloud in the privacy of your own car, feeling a quiet pride in the strange, ancient syllables you were mastering. You had prepared yourself. You believed you had the key to unlock this world. You were going to blend in, a quiet observer moving seamlessly through the past. But now that you're here, truly here, standing in the cobbled market square of a medieval English town, surrounded by smells you're only just beginning to identify, and people whose voices rise and fall in a cadence like nothing you've ever heard. You realize the humbling truth. You have absolutely no idea what anyone is saying. It's not merely the accent, nor the unfamiliar slang. It's that the language they are speaking is a wild, living river, and the carefully constructed vessel of knowledge you brought with you is a mere paper boat, spinning uselessly in the current. You had chosen to study Old English, the language of Beowulf, figuring it was the most authentic route. But Beowulf was a story from a past that was already ancient to these people. They are speaking a form of Middle English, but not the clean, poetic version Chaucer would write down for future generations to study. This is something else entirely, something faster, more nasal, a dialect stitched together with French loanwords from the Norman conquest and riddled with regional quirks that change from one valley to the next. You try to follow a conversation between two merchants. Their words are rapid-fire exchange of guttural sounds and sharp vowels. You can't tell if they are haggling over the price of fish or accusing each other of sorcery. One man shouts across the square to another, his voice carrying clearly over the din. "Wait, sext you? I see any gehördi." You blink, your mind racing to translate, but the sounds vanish before you can grasp them. The man he shouted to glances in your direction, noticing your confused stare. He squints and says something that sounds like, "Bist you klum, oe Flemisk?" Are you clumsy or Flemish? You can only mumble an apology about having a sore throat and shuffle away, your cheeks warm with embarrassment. You make a quiet vow to yourself. Do not speak unless absolutely necessary. Back in your own time, you had imagined that disease or violence would be your greatest challenges. Now it is becoming clear that your own mouth is the biggest liability. The moment you open it, you are a walking contradiction. Someone who looks and smells, by now, like a local, but who speaks with the stilted, bizarre cadence of a time traveler raised by dusty textbooks. Your word choices are wrong, your rhythm is off, and humor is terrifying when you can't grasp the punchline. You learn this the hard way when a baker says something to you with a wink, gesturing toward a string of sausages. You laugh nervously, only to realize from his stony expression that it wasn't a joke. Or maybe it was. Or perhaps it was a profound insult. You may never know. You begin to rely on mime, becoming a master of a silent new language. Are you hungry? You rub your belly. Are you tired? You point toward the setting sun and give an exaggerated yawn. Do you need directions? You simply walk with a look of quiet purpose and hope for the best. This is not communication. It's a game of charades played for survival. Later that day, in the long shadow of the parish church, you overhear two children arguing over a lost sheep. The older one yells, "Nah, I see Wayne Hit is on M Dune." The smaller one jabs a finger back, "Nah, in Egan Sind Wo Fall." You could not feel more like a foreigner if you tried. You start cataloging phrases in your mind, trying to reverse engineer their meaning from context. You begin to understand that after the Norman conquest, French bled into the English tongue like wine into linen. The nobles speak in a clipped, smoother dialect, laced with French and Latin, while the peasants and merchants use a heartier, earthier tongue. You quickly realize that social class is audible here. You can hear who owns land and who sleeps in a ditch just from the way they pronounce the word for bread. You try saying pardon to a well-dressed man, and he nods graciously. You use the same word to a stable hand, and he spits on the ground. At one point, desperate to be understood, you try to recall a few phrases of Latin. This is a grand mistake. A friar overhears you reciting an old line from a textbook and asks where you received your training. You panic and say the first grand place that comes to mind, Rome. The friar's eyebrows shoot up, and he begins asking you detailed questions about church councils you have never heard of. You feign a coughing fit and limp away as fast as you can. You now have a new rule. No Latin unless it is part of a prayer, and you are not the one to say it first. Later, you find yourself in a cook shop, the air thick with the smell of roasting meat and stewed vegetables. You try to purchase what you think is a small meat pasty. You simply point. The cook, a woman with flour in her hair, stares at you. "Twedgen paningas," she says. 2 pennies. You hold out a handful of the few coins you've managed to acquire. She plucks 2 from your palm. Then, seeing your hesitation, she taps your wrist and takes a third with a stern look. She hands you the pasty and something that smells like a barn floor. You nod, and instinctively, you say cheers. Everyone in the small room freezes. The word hangs in the air, utterly alien. You realize too late that cheers is not a medieval word. Not even close. They stare at you as if you've just said something profane. One man chuckles under his breath, another narrows his eyes. You quickly mutter, "God be with you," and bolt out the door, your heart pounding. You discover another surprise. Reading is of no help either. You had assumed signs would be your guide, but almost nothing is written down. When it is, the spelling is inconsistent, phonetic, and barely legible. There is no standard yet. A house might be spelled house on one document and house on another. The only people who can write with any consistency are the clerics, and they mostly write in Latin. Even shop signs, when they exist, are often just pictures. A tanner has a crude painting of a cowhide and a knife above his stall. Another stall, astonishingly, just has a single, large turnip nailed to a board. You feel illiterate, which, to be fair, puts you in the company of most of the people here. The worst part isn't the confusion. It's the quiet fear of what a misunderstanding could cost. One evening, a drunk man stumbles into you. You instinctively say, "Sorry, my fault." He squints, his face inches from yours. "My fault. Wiltu Gildan," he slurs. You realize he thinks you are confessing to a crime or witchcraft. You quickly change your words. "Forgive me, I was clumsy." That seems to work, barely. He grunts and moves on. You realize that in this world, words have a weight you never imagined. There is no ironic oops to shrug off a mistake. The people here live closer to suspicion and violence, and you are always one wrong sentence away from being labeled a heretic, a spy, or simply not right in the head. Over time, though, you adapt. You learn through listening. You begin to use simple, short phrases. You copy what you hear others say, even if you don't fully grasp the meaning. You start to say yeah instead of yes, nay instead of no. You rely on gestures whenever possible. You never ask a question unless someone else asks one first. You listen far more than you speak, and slowly it helps. By the end of your 4th day, you can successfully acquire food without being obviously scammed. You know the proper way to respond to a greeting. You even make a young boy laugh by using a local slang word for a donkey at just the right moment. You are still a foreigner, but now, perhaps, a harmless one. You lie in the monastery loft that night, staring up at the dark rafters, the straw mattress prickling your back. You realize you have survived these last few days not because of the knowledge you brought with you, but because of your ability to let it go. You survived through mimicry because you learned to copy faster than you could ever hope to explain. The truth is, language here isn't just a tool for communication. It is a test of belonging. And every conversation is a pop quiz in a dialect you don't speak, where the price of failure is chillingly high. You think of your phone, of translation apps, of the infinite library of the internet. That luxury is a ghost now. All you have are your ears, your memory, and the growing understanding that silence can be the most eloquent language of all. It begins not with a sudden pain, but with a quiet, insistent cramp, a gentle tug deep in your gut. At first, you think nothing of it. It's a familiar echo of a skipped lunch or a hurried meal. You've certainly felt worse after a meal in your own time. But within the hour, the gentle tug has become a relentless churn, and you find yourself curled up behind a pigsty, the world dissolving into a blur of cold sweat and shivers. This is not just a bad day. This is the unyielding reality of medieval biology taking hold. You tried to be so careful. You followed all the rules you could remember, sticking to what looked like simple bread and avoiding anything too colorful or complex. But you begin to understand that the problem isn't one specific food, it's everything. Your body, accustomed to a world of pasteurized milk, purified tap water, and sterile packaging, has no defense against the vibrant, chaotic, microbial jungle of medieval Europe. Your immune system, in a word, is soft. Your first suspect is the pottage from the night before. Pottage, you've learned, is the foundation of the medieval diet, a simple, murky stew of grains, boiled for hours over a low fire. Into the pot goes whatever is on hand, a bit of cabbage, a lonely turnip, and whatever else was foraged or found that day. The same pot is often used day after day, a never-ending stew flavored with thyme, wood smoke, and a deep, simmering resilience. You knew all this. You ate it anyway. And now, your stomach feels as though it is hosting a full-scale reenactment of a historic battle. By the time the sun begins to set, you are wrapped in your itchy wool cloak like a sad, medieval burrito, your body alternating between a clammy cold and a burning heat. Your lips are parched, and even a sip of the weak, watery ale, usually the safest thing to drink here, turns against you. This is more than just an upset stomach. This is your modern immune system panicking like a small animal in a thunderstorm. It is important to remember that in this world, the very idea of germs does not exist yet. No one knows what bacteria are. Illness is believed to arise from other sources, from bad air, or miasmas drifting from swamps, or from an imbalance in the body's four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Depending on which humor was thought to be out of alignment, the prescribed treatment might be bloodletting with leeches, induced vomiting, or simple, fervent prayer. Most people never knew what truly made them sick. They simply fell ill, and then, by the grace of God and the strength of their own constitution, they either recovered or they faded away. So when you wake the next morning, still alive, deeply groggy but breathing, you have already beaten the odds. A nun finds you there, collapsed near the back wall of a Dominican friary, looking like a scarecrow that has lost its stuffing. You try to stand as she approaches, but the world tilts violently sideways, and your legs fold like wet linen. She doesn't flinch or recoil. She simply kneels, lifts your chin with a steady hand, squints at your eyes with a practiced gaze, and places something bitter and leafy into your mouth. The taste is startlingly foul, like tree bark soaked in vinegar and sorrow. You try to spit it out, but she shushes you with a quiet authority, the gesture of someone who has done this 1,000 times before. You chew. You swallow. You do not vomit. A small, crucial victory. She doesn't ask who you are or where you came from. She simply presses a coarse, cool, damp cloth to your forehead and begins to mutter a prayer in Latin. You can barely follow the words, but the sound itself is a soothing, melodic chant. You catch a few familiar phrases, something about mercy, something about healing, and something about how all of humanity is like dust in the wind. You nod weakly. That last part feels about right. This, you learn, is one of the rare and beautiful paradoxes of the medieval world. While formal medicine can seem terrifyingly crude, the principle of charity is woven deeply into the culture, especially through the church. Religious orders run rudimentary infirmaries, and monasteries often have a designated hospitaller, a monk or nun responsible for tending to the sick, including outsiders. Hospitality is a sacred duty. If you were lucky, as you were today, they would treat you even if you had no coin to offer. And here is another historical truth. You are not alone in your misery. Half the town seems to be suffering from something: persistent coughs, fevers, skin ailments. The world is a walking petri dish. Sanitation is a theoretical concept, and hygiene is, at best, a seasonal activity. And yet, somehow, against all odds, people endure. For the next 2 days, you barely move. The friary allows you to lie on a straw mat in a quiet corner, not quite in the main infirmary, but close enough to be looked after. A young novice brings you thin, warm broth in a chipped wooden bowl. You manage a few sips, the salty warmth a balm to your system. You are so exhausted it feels structural, as if the weariness has settled deep into your bones. Every joint aches. Your breath is foul. You are fairly certain the nun changed your shirt for you while you were unconscious, and you make a mental note to thank her when you can form words again. When you finally manage to sit upright without the world tipping over, you hear it. The bell tower striking sext, the noon hour. You realize your time here has not been marked by a watch, but by the canonical hours, each a holy checkpoint in the day. You have become a creature of bells, of hunger, of the slow return of your own strength, and of the occasional, fever-induced vision of a saint riding a goat made of fire. By the 3rd day, you have graduated to walking slowly and unsteadily. You help sweep the courtyard as a way of showing your gratitude. Your legs wobble, as if they have forgotten what it means to be vertical, but you do not collapse. The friar overseeing you nods in approval. He offers you another lump of the foul-tasting root that the nun first gave you. You chew it dutifully. He claps you firmly on the shoulder. You take it as both a blessing and a warning. You have been sick, truly sick, but you did not die. And in this era, that makes you a statistical outlier. Historically, many people simply didn't get better. Illness could mean anything from a passing ailment to your last few days on Earth. While the average life expectancy was low, this was skewed by the tragic rates of infant mortality. If you survived childhood, you had a decent chance of living to 50 or beyond. But illness was never a surprise. It was a constant companion, an expected part of life's journey. You endured it, and when it came for a neighbor or a loved one, you grieved, and then you carried on, because there was always more work to be done, another fire to stoke, another mouth to feed. You learned something else during your recovery. People here don't speak of sickness in the way you're used to. There are no long, detailed breakdowns of symptoms, no endless conversations about how one is holding up. They simply shrug. It is the season, they might say, or it is God's will. And in a way, it makes a profound sort of sense. When illness is everywhere and effective cures are rare, dwelling on it serves little purpose. Their stoicism is humbling and a little terrifying, because you know that if you fall sick again, you might not be so lucky. You might not be found by a kind nun. You might simply collapse in an alley and not wake up. The next day, you feel strong enough to leave. The friar gives you a final pat on the back. The young novice who brought you broth offers a shy smile. You try to say thank you in the local dialect, but it probably comes out sounding closer to, I kneel in the direction of your turnip. They don't correct you. You walk out of the friary and into the bright morning light, feeling a little bent, a lot lighter, and profoundly grateful. Everything smells stronger, sharper. The world feels intensely real, vividly present. You survived, and in the Middle Ages, that is more than enough to count as a good day. You awaken with a new and profound appreciation for the simple fact of being alive. You also awaken with no bag. It takes you a few seconds for the reality to register. The space beside you on the straw mat is empty. You pat the ground around you, at first casually, then with a rising sense of urgency. You check under your own mat, then under the mat of the man beside you, who is snoring with the delicate subtlety of a rock slide. But it's no use. Your satchel, the one that held your last clean pair of socks, 2 small coins you had earned, a now priceless bar of emergency chocolate, and your carefully hidden compass, is gone. It has vanished, and with it, any lingering, naive belief that you were finally beginning to blend in. You sit up straight and look around the dim alley where you found shelter. It is morning in a town that does not know your name and would not pause if you were to vanish as completely as your bag. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolls the hour. Nearby, a vendor is shouting about the quality of his cabbage in a voice that could tenderize meat. Life, in all its raw and noisy glory, goes on. Just not your life, not as you had planned it. Let's be clear, you have just been robbed, and you quickly learn that nobody cares. There is no town watch to report to, no constable with a notepad asking for details. The concept of a formal police force is centuries away. The only real law enforcement is the bailiff, and his primary concern is ensuring taxes are paid to the Lord, not recovering your missing socks. You try to explain your loss to a woman sweeping the doorstep of her small house. She glances up from her work, her expression a mixture of pity and indifference, and offers a shrug that communicates everything. Welcome to town. You mention it to a local friar you pass on the street. He frowns with genuine sympathy, says a brief prayer for the soul of your misplaced satchel, and then suggests that perhaps its disappearance was God's will, a lesson in non-attachment. You mention the word stolen to a baker. He laughs, a loud, booming sound that nearly makes him drop a tray of dense rye loaves. He is not laughing because he thinks you are lying. He is laughing because, of course, it was stolen. What other outcome did you possibly expect? In the medieval world, theft is not a shocking anomaly. It is part of the natural order of things, as common as mud in the streets, the ache of a bad tooth, or a sudden, wind-whipped fire. In a world where almost everyone is poor and many are desperate, anything left unattended is considered an opportunity. This is why the locals carry their few valuables tied securely to their belts, tucked deep into hidden pouches, or quite literally sewn into the linings of their clothes. Wealthy merchants often employed young boys to shadow them, not as apprentices, but as walking, talking security alarms. Even the nuns, you've noticed, keep a weary, protective hand on their coin purses when walking through a crowd. Sanctity, you learn, is no match for scarcity. And then there are the knives. They aren't fashion accessories. They are essential tools for daily life. Every peasant has one for cutting bread and mending tools. Every merchant carries one. Even small children sometimes carry tiny, dull blades, not for fighting, but for slicing an apple or cutting a tangled piece of string. And, if absolutely necessary, for making it clear that someone should not try to take their apple. Theft wasn't just tolerated. In many ways, it was an expected risk of being alive. Eventually, you return to the friary where you had recovered, the place that feels the closest to a sanctuary. You recount the story of the theft again, this time to the quiet, gray-robed monk who first gave you shelter. Brother Thomas, you think his name is. You tell the story with a bit more sorrow now, leaning into the quiet tragedy of your loss. The monk listens with a polite, deep gravity, his eyes never leaving yours. When you finish, he says nothing, but disappears into a side room. He returns a few moments later and places something heavy and cool into your palm. A knife. It's small and rusted, the blade dulled with age and the wooden handle cracked, but it fits in your hand as if it were made for you. You try to hand it back, thinking it's a mistake, but he gently closes your fingers around it. He makes a simple, clear gesture, palm flat, knife held close, and then turns and walks away without a word. You don't need to understand the local dialect to receive the message. Keep this with you. The world has taken from you. Now you must learn to protect what is yours. Historically, this is not an unusual kindness. In fact, for someone in your position, alone, unfamiliar, and obviously vulnerable, this is a necessary rite of passage. You are beginning to understand that in medieval England, justice does not function as you know it. While there were courts and laws, Their enforcement was inconsistent and rarely swift. A local constable might exist in theory, but his authority was limited, and his priorities were focused on protecting the property of landowners and preventing the local tavern from turning into a murder scene every Saturday night. You, an unknown traveler with no family, no guild membership, and no local connections, are not the kind of person anyone is going to stick their neck out for. The powerful guilds protected their own members fiercely, but outsiders were considered fair game. You are not in a guild. You are not from a household. You are a walking opportunity. Markets, you learn, are the most dangerous places. They are crowded, loud, and full of chances to be relieved of your belongings. A street performer draws a crowd. The crowd creates cover, and somewhere in that chaotic moment, a cutpurse practices their silent art. The threat of theft is so common that it is priced into the very fabric of life. The merchant selling you a dusty apple has already accepted that 3 more will vanish before noon. The baker keeps his coin jar buried deep in a barrel of flour. The butcher keeps his cleaver sharp and conspicuously visible on his work block. And when thieves are caught, the consequences are theatrical, often brutal, and wildly inconsistent. For a minor theft, public humiliation is the preferred method. A thief might be locked in the pillory and pelted with rotten vegetables, or forced to wear a sign proclaiming their crime while being paraded through the streets. A repeat offender, or someone unlucky enough to steal from a powerful person, might lose a hand or an ear. In some places, they are branded with hot irons to mark them for life. In others, they are simply hanged. No lengthy trial, no appeal, just a rope, a tree, and a somber audience. You realize that while the law is slow to protect you, it is spectacularly vicious when it decides to punish. But here is the most important lesson. Most thieves are never caught, because in the chaos of daily life, no one is really watching and few are willing to get involved. Your own senses begin to sharpen. You learn to tie your coin pouch, now holding only a single, gifted coin, deep inside your tunic. You walk through crowds with a hand resting over it. You sleep with it tucked securely under your ribs. You start to recognize the signs. Someone whose eyes linger too long, someone who follows a little too closely, hands that remain hidden under a cloak. You also learn the art of preemptive destitution. You begin to walk like you have nothing worth taking. You dress in clothes even shabbier than before. You adopt a slight limp, so that any would-be thief assumes you are not worth the effort. Your new life strategy: be uninteresting. You meet a man near the baker's stall. He's missing 3 teeth and has a long, pale knife scar that runs from his jaw to his collarbone. He wordlessly offers you half a cabbage he is eating. You accept. In exchange, he asks for nothing. You eat the raw cabbage. You sit together in silence. You leave with all your belongings. This feels like progress. That night, curled up against the friary wall, you sleep for the first time with one hand on your meager pouch and the other resting on the cool, solid handle of your knife. And for the first time since you arrived in this unpredictable, mud-soaked century, you wake up with all your things. You learn your next lesson before you've even finished what might be considered breakfast. It happens in a tavern, or what passes for one in this century. A long, smoky room, crowded even in the morning, filled with the low murmur of conversations and the smell of roasting meat. The food is warm, the bread is nearly fresh, and the stew is only mildly questionable. For the first time, you've started to feel something that dangerously resembles confidence. A local woman even offered you a small, brief smile as she refilled your wooden bowl. For a fleeting second, it feels as though you are finally, maybe, getting the hang of this. Then, you make the mistake of sitting at the wrong table. You choose it for the simple reason that it's near the hearth fire. Your feet are perpetually numb with a damp chill, and your clothes still carry the memory of last night's rain. The warmth is a luxury you can't resist. There are 3 other men already seated at the long, rough-hewn table. They are all eating, none of them talking, wrapped in their own separate worlds. You assume, in your modern, egalitarian way, that an empty space at a table is simply an empty space. It is not. The man closest to you stops chewing, his spoon hovering halfway to his mouth. The man across from him slowly lowers his own spoon, the clatter against the wood unnaturally loud in the sudden pocket of silence that has formed around you. The third man, who is older and broader, with hands that look like they were carved from tree roots, simply stares. He doesn't yell. He doesn't say a word. He just stares at you, and his gaze is not one of anger, but of something far more chilling, a profound, questioning stillness. You feel it like a physical force, like a sudden drop in temperature. You stand up, your half-eaten stew suddenly feeling heavy in your hands. Nobody tells you why you cannot sit there. Nobody needs to. In that silent, crushing moment, you already know. You are not the same. Not in dress, not in posture, not in the silent language of your very being. In medieval England, social hierarchy isn't just an abstract concept. It is a set of invisible walls, and you just walked right through one. You take your bowl to a small, vacant bench by the door. It's colder here, but it is much, much safer. You begin to notice it everywhere now that your eyes have been opened. The subtle way some people never step aside when you pass on the narrow street. The way others offer a slight, almost imperceptible bow of the head. The cut of a tunic, the color of a belt, the quality of the leather in a pair of shoes. These are not matters of fashion. They are signals, a complex and unspoken language that everyone here has been fluent in since birth. Class isn't a guess here. It's a script that everyone is performing. Lords command with an easy authority. Knights strut with a casual arrogance. Guildsmen puff out their chests. Peasants, you notice, almost always look down. And servants have mastered the art of vanishing into the background. Even the children in the street seem to know instinctively who they are supposed to bow to. It is a kind of cultural muscle memory, and you have none of it. You are a blank page in a world of exquisitely detailed manuscripts, and your blankness is a dangerous thing. You bow too deeply to a wealthy merchant's wife, and she laughs, a tinkling sound of amusement. Her guards, however, do not. You raise your voice, just slightly, at a servant who you believe has shorted you on a measure of grain. He spits into the dirt at your feet, and no one in the crowded market does a thing. You try to explain yourself once, out loud, to the baker who you offended before. I didn't know, you say earnestly. He looks at you not with anger, but with a kind of weary disdain, as if you are an idiot. Then you shouldn't be here, he says, turning back to his oven. And in his world, he is right. Historically speaking, this wasn't mere rudeness. It was a necessary enforcement of order. Medieval society was rigid because it had to be. In a world without resumes or digital footprints, your clothes, your speech, and your posture were your identity. They were the vital clues that told everyone else how to treat you. If you didn't follow the rules, the entire, fragile system began to fray. Most people were born into their station and died in it. If you were born a villain, a kind of unfree peasant tied to the land, you could not simply decide to become a merchant. If your father was a tanner, you were expected to become a tanner. The few who managed to climb the social ladder usually did so through the church or distinguished military service, and even then, the ascent took generations. Everyone else stayed firmly in their place. You meet a man named Will near the blacksmith's forge. He is old, with hands stained by his trade and eyes that hold a kind of exhausted pity. He watches you for a time, then decides to take mercy on you. He explains the rules. Not all of them. That would take weeks, but enough to keep you from offending the next person you meet. You don't touch anyone wearing silk, he says, his voice low. Not even if they're on fire. You blink. What if they need help, you ask? Then you pray for them, he says, from a respectful distance. He explains that colors are codes. Fur-lined cloaks mean power. Bright blues and purples are reserved for nobility. Green is acceptable, unless it is too fine a shade of green. He also tells you this: you've been walking wrong. Apparently, your gait is too loose, too confident. You don't step softly enough. You don't lower your head quickly enough. You don't make space fast enough when a person of higher rank walks by. You move, he says, with no malice at all, like someone who has never been hit for moving wrong. And later that day, they almost fixed that for you. You try to get a spot near the public well. The water there is cleaner, and the sun is warm on your face. You step ahead of a young girl carrying a heavy, sloshing pail. She looks about 13, her face sunburned and her hands raw from work. An older woman behind her in line shouts something sharp and angry. You don't catch the words, but the tone is unmistakable. Everyone looks. You freeze. The girl glares at you with a kind of weary fury. "Where's your badge?" she demands. You have no idea what she means. You later learn that apprentices in town wear pins or stitched symbols on their clothes. They show that you belong to someone, to a guild, to a household. If you don't have one, you are a stranger. And a stranger, you are learning, is beneath everyone. You step back, your face burning. The girl does not thank you. She shouldn't have to. You start paying closer attention. You notice that even eye contact is stratified. A noble does not truly look at a merchant. A merchant does not look at a peasant. A peasant does not look at anyone unless they are spoken to first. And you have been looking at everyone, trying to read their faces like subtitles in a film. You learn to lower your gaze. You learn to speak less, and when you do, to speak more softly. You learn to say "my lord" or "my lady," even when the words feel foreign and sticky in your throat. Eventually, people stop looking at you with suspicion. Now, they simply look through you, as if you were a servant or a part of the scenery, as if you belong. And in a strange way, this feels like progress. There are benefits, you discover, to being invisible. It means you can overhear things, plans, rumors, the price of goods, whispered secrets. You begin to understand the town not just by its physical layout, but by its intricate web of social tensions. Who is in debt to whom? Who is secretly courting whom? Who is plotting to skip their tithes to the church? You become a shadow with ears. But it is exhausting to carry the weight of this invisibility. You begin to dream of modern things, not for comfort, but for their beautiful clarity. A queue, a menu with fixed prices, a simple name tag. Something to tell you exactly where you stand. Because here, you never quite know. You are not noble. You are not guild. You are not clergy. You are not peasant. You are not even a convincing pilgrim. You are a gap in the system, a ghost in borrowed clothing. One night, a boy bumps into you in the dark and mutters, "Watch yourself, lowborn." You should be angry. You should be indignant. But as he scurries away, the only thing you feel is a profound, bone-deep sense of relief. He thinks he knows what you are, and that is the closest you have come yet to belonging. You are sitting on a low stone wall, chewing on a piece of what was once, allegedly, bread when you make the mistake. It is born not of carelessness, but of a deep, aching need for certainty in a world of constant ambiguity. You are trying to find north. You simply want to know where, precisely, you buried your few emergency items in the woods 2 days ago. It's a small act of reorienting yourself, a way to feel a flicker of control. You dig a hand into the hidden pouch you've painstakingly sewn into your tunic lining and palm the small, brass compass. Just a glance, a quick peek under the cover of your cloak. It is small, discreet, and in your eyes, a marvel of beautiful, blessed accuracy. It is nothing like medieval directions, which seem to be based entirely on how loudly and vaguely one can point. Unfortunately, you are not nearly as discreet as you think. A young boy, chasing a stray dog, skids to a halt nearby, his eyes wide. "What is that?" he asks, his voice a mixture of awe and suspicion. "Is it a jewel?" You snap the compass shut and shove it back into its hiding place, your heart suddenly a cold stone in your chest. But it is too late. The boy is already shouting for his uncle, a man known for his love of gossip, and within moments, a small crowd has gathered. They stare at you as if you've just grown a second head, and the second head is singing hymns backward. A woman instinctively crosses herself. A man with a thick beard mutters something about Eastern sorcery. And, to your dismay, the local priest, who seems to have a sixth sense for theological anomalies, begins walking your way with a placid, inquisitive look on his face. You walk away, casually, calmly, at a pace that could in no way be considered fleeing. Just briskly. This is your first, sharp warning. Nothing screams, "Not from here," quite like pulling out an object that no one can name. Even the simplest modern item, a pen light, a plastic button, a zipper, can trigger a cascade of suspicion. It's not always because the object itself is terrifying. Sometimes, it's just unfamiliar enough to be intensely interesting. And in a town where interesting is one short step away from dangerous, that is never a compliment. You must remember that the medieval worldview has little room for the category of weird but harmless. Things are either part of God's natural, understandable order, or they are not. And if they are not, they likely came from the devil, or from the mysterious East, or both. Later that afternoon, as you are leaning against the cool stone wall of the friary, pretending to study a religious carving with intense focus, the priest finds you. He is not hostile, merely curious, but his curiosity is a far more dangerous tool. It is sharp, patient, and relentless. He asks where you are from. You give your now practiced, vague answer. From a distant land. He asks what you do. "I am a pilgrim," you say. He nods, then leans in slightly. "And do pilgrims from your land," he asks, his voice soft, "commonly carry small, brass devices that glow in the sun and spin as if enchanted?" You try to change the subject. He does not let you. Historically, priests were often the most educated men in any given town. They could read, they had access to ancient texts, and worst of all, they had time to think. They were also charged with maintaining the moral and spiritual order of their flock, which, in practice, often meant identifying threats. And while the great witch hunts were not yet in full swing in the 1300s, heretics, sorcerers, and suspiciously knowledgeable foreigners were definitely on their radar. The church did not always need proof. It often needed only a pervasive sense of unease, a few frightened whispers, and a compass you could not explain. That night, you make your way back into the forest, not to the familiar edges, but deep into its heart, past the berry bushes and the stinging nettles, past the ancient oak where you tripped last week and cursed so loudly you're sure the squirrels are still gossiping about it. You find a spot. Using a flat stone, you dig into the cold, damp earth. Your hands are freezing, your fingernails fill with dirt. Eventually, you uncover your stash. It feels like digging up a time capsule from a forgotten world. There is the small tin of waterproof matches, a backup compass, a foil-wrapped protein bar, and a laminated card that reads, in crisp, modern letters, "Emergency contact." You stare at it, a wave of profound, hollow grief washing over you. There is no emergency contact here. There is only you. This is not just hiding evidence. It is a funeral. You take the compass, the beautiful, logical, perfect thing, and you wrap it in a piece of linen. You bury it deep. You hesitate. Then you take the protein bar, a dense brick of futuristic nutrition, and bury it as well. It's too strange, too unexplainable. You keep only the matches, tucking them away. If someone asks, you will say the friar taught you a clever trick with flint and steel. You are becoming a good liar. In medieval towns, being from somewhere else buys you about 10 minutes of grace. After that, People want details, names of villages, names of local saints, the name of your lord. You cannot simply say, "I'm from a distant land," and expect a polite nod. Everyone here is from somewhere, and they all know someone who knows someone from there. If you slip up once, they assume you are lying. If you slip up twice, they assume you are dangerous. You have slipped up twice this week alone, so you change tactics again. You become quieter. You speak even less. You bow more often. You mutter constantly. If someone asks a question you don't know how to answer, you adopt a pained expression and say softly, "It is a matter of my penance." People nod solemnly and back away. Mystery, you learn, is safer than mistakes. Let's be clear about something. Medieval people are not stupid. They know their world with an intimacy you can't imagine. They know how a knife should be forged, how fabric should stretch, how a seam should be stitched. They have never seen machine stitching like the one on your thermal undershirt. You tell them it is a special monk's design. They narrow their eyes. Monks do not sew like that. A baker eyes the impossibly smooth finish of your worn-out boots. Strange tanning process, he says. You mumble something about a foreign type of ox hide. A merchant fingers the synthetic cord you use as a belt. He tests its strength between his fingers. "What plant makes this fiber?" he asks. "A rare northern weed," you say. His eyebrows rise. You are running out of lies. Eventually, someone calls you a mystic. It is not meant as a compliment. It happens after you help a child who scraped his knee. You simply cleaned it with a little wine and wrapped it with the cleanest piece of cloth you had. You said nothing magical, but the child's wound healed quickly, without festering. Too quickly. A neighbor saw. A neighbor told others. Now, people have started to think you know things you shouldn't. It is not always dangerous to be called a mystic. Some were revered, especially if they were old, deeply pious, and quiet. But you are none of those things. You are young, foreign, and you don't always know which saint to invoke when someone sneezes. Here is the real risk. You have become interesting again. And in medieval life, that is rarely good. Interesting people get noticed. Noticed people get questioned. Questioned people get tested. And you do not want to be tested. You start burying more things. Not just your gear, but your personality, your stories, your gestures, your very sense of self. You practice local slang. You learn which saints are popular in this region. You find a phrase you can use as a shield. "I go where the Lord leads me." It is vague, devout, and confusing enough to halt most questions. You say it a lot. One day in the market, you spot someone else who doesn't belong. A woman, wearing thin sandals in the middle of a cold autumn. Her cloak is too new, her posture too straight. She asks the price of a pie in perfect, textbook Latin, like a character from a history play come to life. The vendor just squints at her. You turn and walk away. She will learn, or she will not. Either way, she is not your problem. Your own survival instinct is now honed to a razor's edge. And in the Middle Ages, not yet being burned at the stake is a kind of victory. You are getting better at disappearing. Not in a literal, magical sense, of course. You still walk through the muddy alleys like an underfed ghost in borrowed clothes. But you have learned the art of it now. You have learned to shrink yourself, to round off your sharp, modern edges, to stop taking up so much space in the world. It is a kind of gentle erasure, a fading into the background. Your accent has not changed, but the confidence that once propelled your words has been replaced by a quiet, watchful hesitation. You do not speak unless spoken to. You keep your gestures small, your reactions delayed. You do not ask questions. You do not smile too widely. With increasing skill, you are trying to become forgettable, and it is working. A wealthy merchant actually looked right past you today, his gaze sliding over you as if you were a post or a shadow. You realize, with a strange and quiet thrill, that this is a significant medieval milestone. Blending in, you've learned, does not mean you truly belong. It just means people have stopped looking too hard. And in the 14th century, for a stranger, This invisibility is the only true safety you can purchase. The transformation starts with your body. You have lost weight you didn't know you had to spare, and your ribs have become a quiet reminder of the daily lack. Your gait is slower, more deliberate. You have learned to walk in the ingrained patterns of the town, to move with the flow of foot traffic in the market, not against it, flowing like a drop of water in a slow-moving stream. You have mastered the posture of the perpetually tired, the half-bowed humility of someone who was born to be overlooked. Your clothing helps, too. The tunic you traded for, once just a scratchy, mud-stained mess of coarse wool, is now faded and worn in a way that feels authentic. The tattered cloak you wrap around your shoulders no longer smells distinctly not from here. Instead, it just smells faintly of wood smoke, rain, and dust like everyone else's. This morning, you even smudged a little soot on your cheekbones on purpose. It is a better disguise than any mask. In this world, a clean face is a suspicious face. You have learned to speak less and listen more, to understand the rhythm of the town's heart. Not the specific words, necessarily, but the tones, the pauses, the kinds of things people care about. The price of bread, the endless rain, the whispers of gossip that are the real currency of this place. The baker's daughter who vanished for 2 days and returned with a haunted look in her eyes. The tanner's wife who gave birth to twins. Again, the persistent rumor that the tax collector's mule has been cursed by a beggar with the evil eye. You now carry these stories like smooth stones in your pocket, and you repeat some of them, cautiously, when the moment calls for it. You never claim to know things firsthand, only that you heard them on the road. No one ever questions it. Everyone hears things on the road. You also know, intimately now, what not to say. You never mention precise measurements, specific dates, or large numbers. You never use words like kilometer, or coffee, or Tuesday. You have purged makes sense and no problem from your vocabulary. You once said sure in response to a question, and the shoemaker's apprentice looked at you as if you'd just sprouted a second nose. Now you just say, very well, and nod. You nod a lot. Sometimes, though, they still look at you sideways. Perhaps your hands are still too clean, the fingernails not permanently etched with grime. Maybe it's the way you still flinch almost imperceptibly when someone nearby coughs too deeply. Or maybe it's that you never seem to know exactly where you are going, your path always having the slight hesitation of the uninitiated. But more and more, those looks are fleeting. People have better things to worry about than your lingering strangeness. The weather, the bishop's latest decree, the rising cost of barley. You are no longer their problem. You are barely even their curiosity. And you take that as a victory. You have even found a quiet rhythm to your days. Wake before the bells. Join the silent line at the friary for a bowl of watered-down broth. Avoid eye contact with the man who once offered to sell you his wife's hair. Help unload crates at the docks for a few hours in exchange for the head of a fish to make soup. Try to haggle with the baker for day-old crusts. Fail, and settle for what you are given. Eat while sitting on a step somewhere, pretending you are just resting between important tasks. Smile once, genuinely, when a child drops her turnip and you catch it just before it hits the mud. You hand it back to her, and she looks at you as if you've just given her a piece of gold. In that moment, you feel a little more human. You have even gotten used to the smells. Well, not truly used to them, but you have stopped retching. You no longer cover your nose when passing the tannery. You no longer dry heave when the wind carries the scent of the public latrines uphill. You no longer gag at the sight of dead animals being skinned in the open air. Now, you just squint, hold your breath, and walk a little faster. This, too, is progress. Someone calls you pilgrim. It is the first time anyone has said the word without a hint of skepticism in their voice. They ask where you are headed. You reply, Santiago. Then you add the word you've heard so many others use, the word that covers all uncertainties. Eventually, The person nods in understanding. Everyone, it seems, is heading somewhere eventually. They offer you a piece of their bread. You thank them in the local dialect. You use the wrong verb tense, but it is close enough. You are invited to sit with them by the fire. You are no longer an outsider to be scrutinized, just another traveler. Someone with sore feet, no coin, and stories you are not quite ready to tell. You sit with your back against a warm wall, eating stale bread beside a man whose name you didn't catch, and you share a silence that is not awkward, but companionable. You listen to the church bells. You watch chickens fight over a scrap in the mud. For a moment, you could almost believe you belong here. Almost, but you do not. In the quiet moments, a different reality floods in. You miss your shoes, your ridiculously comfortable, supportive shoes. You miss ice, the clean, sharp clink of it in a glass. You miss toothpaste and proper bandages, and the simple, miraculous ability to say, "I'm hungry," without fearing you will be immediately robbed or pitted. You miss being understood. Not just your words, but your world. The way people used to talk about things that have no name here. Movies and weekends and grocery stores and car trouble and birthday plans. Here, the conversation is almost always about survival. And survival doesn't leave much room for small talk. Still, you have adapted. You blend. You survive. You have learned that disappearing is not just a trick. It is a skill honed by fear and practice. And tonight, as you curl up in the corner of a friary storeroom, clutching a half-rotted but blessedly warm blanket, you almost feel like a part of this century. You will never truly belong. But for now, you are tolerated. And in the Middle Ages, that is the closest thing there is to peace.